welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is Thursday, September the 12th. I'm Zach Ewing. We're with Scott Rabalais and Wilson Alexander. We're previewing LSU South Carolina today. First and foremost, trust that everyone got through the storm safely. Hopefully, power is on, no damage, all that sort of stuff, no flooding. So best wishes to those still affected. But everything's okay here. We made it to the studio, guys. And you guys, the flight to South Carolina is still on time and everything?
Yeah, all systems go. Everything was, I think, fairly minor in the greater Baton Rouge area. At least I hope it was for everybody. Where we were, my area was pretty unaffected, and so I hope everybody was similar to that.
Yeah, me as well. I don't live too far from LSU's campus, so I imagine Tiger Stadium fared pretty well. They don't have a home game this week. Got time to clean things up, but yeah, as far as hurricanes go, this was not too bad for the Baton Rouge area. So that was good.
Good week for LSU to be on the road, and the Saints are on the road as well. So that probably helps planning things. We're going to talk a lot about the Tigers and Gamecocks today. Obviously, that game at 11 a.m. on Saturday. First, we want to let you know that our show is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. We're going to get into the matchup, break down both sides' offenses, defenses, keys to the game, and predictions. First, we got a quick break. We'll be back with you in 60 seconds.
Fellas, it's clear why Caesars brought us together. This is the ultimate quarterback roundtable.
I think I know why we're here.
What? Quarterback, high school, Oklahoma?
I thought that was a musical.
Garth, I think you're here because when people use Caesars Sportsbook, they earn with Caesars rewards. Things like celebrity chef dining, Vegas vacations, even tickets to your show.
This app is over the top. There's the idea.
Bet with Caesars Sportsbook. Earn Caesars rewards and see your favorite quarterback, Garth Brooks, in concert.
Hey, you can't throw like that.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me
All right, so LSU South Carolina, guys. It's Tigers' SEC opener. I think, there was a lot of, LSU opens with USC, and then they've got 4 games they should just roll right through before they play Ole Miss. And then South Carolina kind of snuck up and surprised everybody. They beat the tar out of Kentucky last week. Now College game day's in town. Like, all of a sudden, this feels like a much bigger game than we thought just like a week ago.
Absolutely does. I mean, especially on the LSU side of things where, I think part of it is that LSU looked unimpressive against Nichols. So now it feels like an LSU team that maybe is struggling a little bit. And all of a sudden, at least for us who aren't necessarily following South Carolina like on a daily basis, it's like, oh, wow, maybe South Carolina could actually make some noise this year. They absolutely demolished Kentucky, especially in the second half. And so it does have a lot more intrigue than it did at the start of the season, certainly. And this becomes a very important game for LSU. It's one where you cannot, winning it, I still feel like everybody will kind of write it off if they win. But if they lose, then the sky's falling.
Yeah, definitely that angst factor is increased, I think, Rab.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, especially, like you said, going into the season, looks like a game that LSU, you got to go on the road, but it's not, not the toughest place or toughest team to play, especially after South Carolina squeaked by Old Dominion. They really seemed to struggle in that game. And they didn't do a lot offensively against Kentucky, but they held Kentucky to 6 points. You win by 25 points on the road in the SEC, whoever you're playing. You have to take note. And they have a rabid fan base. I imagine it's going to be a packed Williams-Brice Stadium, especially with game days, just going to amp things up a little more. And LSU still has that cachet that a team like South Carolina, I won't say will make their season if they beat them, but it certainly would be a big, one of the biggest wins they could have of the year. So I agree with Wilson. It's a game that LSU, it seems like they should win, and people just take it in stride if they win. But if they lose, and you drop to 1-2, and you drop out of the polls, and you drop out of the whole national picture whatsoever, it's really going to be potentially devastating for their season.
I mean, it would be hard to recover from a lot of different standpoints. The momentum would be gone. Whatever's left after losing to USC, I don't think a lot of the fan base would if not check out, then at least sort of, hey, you're going to have to prove something to me before I'm back in. And from a college football playoff perspective, probably would have to win out at that point. You'd have to go 9-0 down the stretch to even have a chance.
Absolutely. And that's going to be really hard to do with what LSU still has on the schedule. I mean, you still got Ole Miss and Alabama in October/November. You still got an Oklahoma team that we'll see what they look like at the end of the year. Going on the road at Texas A&M, that's not an easy place to play. Arkansas even showed some good things against Oklahoma State on the road last week, and even though they didn't get it done in overtime. So now you're looking at every game really from here through the end of the season is pretty close to a must win, but especially this one. Like you cannot afford to lose a second game 3 weeks into the season.
Yeah, and if this is a game that's 14-14 at halftime, or LSU finds itself behind, they blew a coverage, and all of a sudden it's 7-0 at the end of the first quarter, even, like, there's going to be a lot of butterflies in Baton Rouge in fans' stomachs, I think.
And it's a game that you kind of penciled in before the season as a win, and now it looks much more dicey. But you got to win this. If you don't win this one, how do you expect? And I know what Brian Kelly said this week, and certainly a lot of validity to it. You have to consider each week on its own merits. But you have that stretch coming up with Ole Miss and at Arkansas and at Texas A&M and Alabama at home in a 5-week span. I think I got the order right. I know it's back-to-back trips to Arkansas and Texas A&M. And if you don't win this game, how do you expect to come out of that stretch 3-1 or certainly 4-0? So you have to. A lot of the jury's still out on LSU. I was looking at the ESPN's FPI predictions, their power index for each matchup of the season, and obviously they're 1-1 at this point. It had them with the games they're favored in and not favored in, had them going 6-6 at this point. So that's not too surprising in the fact that you're still trying to get a beat on this team and a handle on how good they are or how good they can be. And no team exists in a vacuum from the beginning of the season to the end. But it's certainly a telling marker on the way to the rest of the season how they perform in this game.
Yeah, I mean, there's no easy game in the SEC. And if you're going to be a contender, you're going to have to go on the road and win a game like this. So we'll see what LSU's made of. And I think, to your point, if they can't do it, then all of a sudden you have to reassess where they are in every other matchup from the season. If you can't beat South Carolina, what makes you think you can beat Ole Miss even at home? What makes you think you can beat Alabama or Texas A&M? I mean, at that point, you really have to reassess everything. So let's break it down. We're going to start with the injury report. Today's injury report is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic. We talked about the guys who are out for the season: John Emery, Jacoby, and Guillory. Obviously, LSU will be without them. Wilson, the receiving core, probably the primary other concern, with Chris Hilton still questionable, and Kyle Parker still questionable. Like the depth is getting tested there, and so far I think it's been okay. Yeah,
no, the receivers, they got enough guys there to make up for it. Xavier Thomas and Aaron Anderson have really sort of filled that void. Aaron Anderson's having a great start to his season. Xavier Thomas has made such a difference in the return game, but is also someone who can probably continue to get more involved on offense. So that gives you, those two right there, plus C.J. Daniels and Kyron Lacey. That's a solid 4 right there. And I don't think I'm forgetting any of the other sort of main wide receivers. And then, let's see, maybe it's going to be tough because he didn't really show it against Nichols, but, they were trying to get Shelton Sampson involved in that game. Maybe he becomes more of a factor moving forward. So they've got some guys there at receiver. But we actually, Wednesday night, got the first player availability report for LSU that's ever been released. SEC mandated now going to the game. And so the rest of it is that Jordan Allen, starting safety, is questionable. Deshaun Womack, the backup defensive end behind Braden Swinson, is also questionable, and so is Whit Weeks, one of their sort of 4 main linebackers, is questionable. We saw West with a boot on his right leg earlier this week in the facility, and so we'll see as we get closer to game time kind of those 3 guys' status, because the thing with Parker and with Hilton is, like, Hilton at this point is, Brian Kelly said day-to-day, but it's sort of reading between the tea leaves, reading between the lines. It's one of those things where it's like, it's really unclear when they're going to get him back. Like, we've tried to sort of get more of a timeline about him, and it's really unclear. It's a kind of injury apparently where it's not necessarily set, like when he's going to be 100%. It's not straightforward, his recovery from this, because Brian Kelly's talking about how he's running, but he needs to have to be able to tolerate certain amounts of pain in order to play. And so Hilton is one of those things where everybody wants to see, like, is he going to play this week? Is he going to play this week? But maybe just sort of sit back and be patient and start to focus on some other guys for now, and then just be pleased whenever he does that he comes back.
Yeah, I mean, Rab, we talk about receiving depth, and here Garrett Nussmeier is throwing for 6 touchdown passes. So obviously there's enough out there. 6 in one game.
6 in one game.
Eight
He
total.
leads the SEC with 8.
Yeah.
Is what we were driving at. Yeah, I mean, he's spread the ball around to a lot of different receivers, and obviously, when you talk about the receivers, you have to talk about the tight ends. Mason Taylor's been a big target for him going back to the ReliaQuest Bowl, and so far this season. And then Pimpton, I guess, is okay.
Yeah, he wasn't listed on the
so
report.
they'll have him available. And then Green caught a touchdown pass against Nicholls State. So there's a lot of weapons there, and they obviously they like the multiplicity, the different looks and different options that they get with the tight ends, and then Garrett's done a good job of spreading the ball around. And we assume checking down to a lot of runners, checking out a lot of run plays to short passes or other kinds of passes, because Brian Kelly said they called about 35 or 36 run plays against Nicholls, and they ran the ball 21 times altogether, and 2 of those were runs by Garrett. So he's doing a lot of checking down to things with other teams in the box. Obviously, we'll see how the defense lines up against LSU Saturday.
Yeah, we'll get into that. First, want to let you know the Baton Rouge Clinic is your trusted healthcare partner in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. Okay, so our breakdown, as we always do, we're going to start with when LSU's on offense, when LSU has the ball, South Carolina's on defense, and you kind of have this irresistible force, immovable object going on here. I mean, South Carolina's defense was absolutely the reason they looked so good against Kentucky. Seriously, go look at the box score. Those Kentucky quarterbacks were god-awful in that game. And you have to give the Gamecocks a lot of credit for that. On the other side, you have this passing offense, like we talked about, Garrett Nussmeier, 8 touchdown passes. Wilson, the missing piece maybe for LSU is, can they get the running game going, especially if South Carolina kind of keys on Nussmeier?
Absolutely. And, South Carolina might have the ability to get a pass rush without having to blitz too much. They have 2 impressive edge rushers. That's the thing that sort of stood out to me the most this season so far for South Carolina, is what they've been able to do, led by Dylan Stewart, a true freshman who looks like one of the best freshmen in the SEC, and Kennard, the other defensive end on the other side. South Carolina is, now the stats are escaping me, but they're top 10 nationally in tackles for loss, sacks, forced fumbles, and I think interceptions as well. They've been creating a good bit of disruption, and so it's going to be a really fun matchup to watch those 2 edge rushers versus Will Campbell and Emory Jones. That's strength on strength right there. I feel like LSU might have an edge in terms of experience because Stewart is a true freshman. This will be his 3rd game. But that is something where if South Carolina is able to drop a lot of guys back and still do what it wants to do on the defensive front without bringing too many extra hats, then LSU could really face a challenge in that regard. Either way, though, they do need to get the run game going to provide some balance because it just has not lived up to expectations at this point in the season.
Yeah, it's strength on strength, like Wilson said. South Carolina leads the SEC in sacks. LSU tied for first with not allowing a sack so far this year. So Garrett's had to run a couple of times. He's had some pressure, and certainly he's moved in the pocket. But overall, they've done a very good job with pass protection, and which of course has thrown an even bigger spotlight on their run blocking. That's one of the more intriguing matchups. Who will win the day? Because it comes down to the trenches most of the time, and that's certainly very evident in this matchup.
The one thing that stands out to me just real quick is that LSU, for all its struggles in the run game, I think it's only allowed 4 tackles for loss. Like, it's not like defenses are just getting into the backfield and causing a ton of negative plays. Now, Nicholls probably wasn't necessarily that capable of doing that, really, but it's like they aren't. Like, South Carolina's had a lot of success with that. It's just that they need to then get up to the second level on their blocks and start to create a push up front instead of just sort of things stagnating at the line of scrimmage. Because not only they're getting blown off the ball, they're just not moving anybody off the ball.
We need to look at that. If we could find some advanced stats, yards before contact, yards after contact, that sort of thing. Because, look at a guy like Caleb Jackson, who we raved about all summer. And I don't even think he has 50 yards yet through 2 games. His yards per carry is way down. Is that the holes aren't there? He's not hitting the holes. His vision is bad. He's not breaking any tackles. I mean, or is it just a blip? And we'll be talking in a couple months about, remember when he was so bad those first 2 games, and he's just fine.
Well, hopefully for LSU, it's the latter there, because Brian Kelly said something, and it's one of those things where I feel like you might have. I feel like any of us would have to be like in the building, in the rooms to like fully understand like what's going on with this point, but that they're trying to sort of like call certain plays that really are tailored to their running back strengths. You said that they all have sort of different things that they do well. They're not necessarily all like complete backs yet, and like certain run plays and things like that. And so I don't really know the answer. I don't know that anybody fully understands what's going on with the run game and why it's having these issues. But it really does start up front. And we were talking to Emory Jones this week, and he was saying that the 5 offensive linemen just need to be on the same page a little bit more, that they aren't necessarily working as a group yet, which is surprising because there's 4 guys in that offensive line who have been together now for like 3 years. And that's the reason why everybody thought they'd be able to run the football. Brian Kelly was tamping down concerns this week for what it's worth, saying that teams have just been stacking the box against LSU. But we'll really start to see if there's anything to that, or if the reason is really just that they are dysfunctional in the run game here over the next, I guess, really this weekend, and then as certainly as we go through the rest of the season.
Yeah, dysfunction would not be a good thing against this South Carolina defense because, as y'all mentioned, they have created the havoc that LSU has talked about on defense. And they've gotten the sacks, they've gotten the TFLs, they've gotten the picks. You mentioned, I think they have 4 interceptions already. They returned 1 for a touchdown last week against Kentucky. And that's going to bring us our star player segment on Thursdays. We like to look at a star player from the other team. Today's star player segment is proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. So our star player from South Carolina, I picked out Jalon Kilgore, and he has an interception in each game. He's only a sophomore. He was a freshman All-America last year, and actually only had 1 pick all of last year. But he's like 16th in the nation at tackles as a defensive back, as a safety and slot corner, and now he's making plays on the ball, obviously. So this kind of plays in, Rab, to what Wilson was talking about with, okay, if South Carolina is going to overplay the run like USC and Nichols apparently did, then can Nussmeier continue to pick apart a secondary that has these guys? Is South Carolina still going to get the interceptions? Like this really feels like we're coming to a key matchup here.
Yeah, much will be revealed about both teams on Saturday. How good, boy! If South Carolina wins, boy, they're 3-0. They're off to a great start. And if LSU wins, like, okay, maybe they've righted the ship. But I just think, and I don't know obviously what they're planning to do at South Carolina, but I just think they're going to play LSU more straight up. But I just don't think they're going to just be stacking the box against LSU. The Nichols, I think, felt like they kind of had to do that. USC, they were shooting the gaps and getting in those gaps that were giving LSU fits. But I don't know. I just think they're going to end up having to play LSU more straight up because they're not going to have any. Maybe on the defensive line, but it's even the way LSU's play on the offensive line, run blocking. I still, and I know South Carolina's been good on their defensive line. I still struggle to think that they can. I said that's a big advantage for South Carolina. So I think they're going to have to just play LSU straight up. And so we're going to see if LSU can be more productive in the run game and a more balanced offense. It was interesting what Kelly said this week too, Wilson, about being balanced. He said balance doesn't mean the same thing to me that maybe you think it does.
Yeah, I mean, I compare that in the past to when Orgeron would talk about balance as being very 50-50 in terms of like how many run calls and pass calls you had during a game. Brian Kelly said for him, it's balance is just, are you equally good at both things and able to use them when you need to? Which was a little bit of a different approach than I've certainly heard in the past. But I think there's a lot of validity to that, where if you are getting just tons and tons of defensive run looks, then yeah, take advantage of that and throw the football. He said they've been getting played a lot of cover 1 so far, but if South Carolina drops back into cover 2 man and is really with a 3-man front and is daring them to run the football, then that's what we'll probably see LSU do. And another factor in this game is, we went through a lot of weather here this week. There's thunderstorms expected in the forecast on Saturday. The LSU might need to run the football if passing becomes a bit of an issue in that kind of conditions.
Some of the remnants of Francine could be in Columbia, Columbia, South Carolina.
And LSU practiced in the rain yesterday for that reason specifically. So I want to hear that Orgeron Kelly comparison you just made in their accents, though. If we could do that next time.
No,
If we could.
I'm not good at that. That gets into so many things there, because like there were so many like national people who just make fun of Orgeron's accent, and people back home would always ask me, "Oh, can you understand him?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can understand him fine." Like I don't know. We always were able to, and then Kelly with the whole family thing, like that just feels like it's stepping into
The force,
a snake pit right there. Doing their accents.
Yeah, no, we'll avoid that, I guess. Okay, flipping things around when South Carolina has the ball, and this is where it's kind of a clear weakness for the Gamecocks. Like despite being 2-0, they have struggled a bit on the offensive side. Their quarterback numbers are not anything to get excited about. Actually, none of their statistical numbers are. So how do they attack LSU, guys?
Well, what South Carolina has done to this point is try to run the football. They are tied with Tennessee for first in the SEC in rush attempts with 90 through 2 games. Difference is Tennessee's averaging like over 6 yards per carry. South Carolina's averaging like 2.89 or 2.98.
2.78.
And they just keep running it.
And they keep doing it anyway. That's been their MO to this point. They got a freaky wide receiver in terms of like physical traits in Nicholas Harbor on the outside, but he hasn't necessarily like turned into this dynamic threat just yet. And then so they've been really leaning on the run. Rocket Sanders, former Arkansas running back, transferred over there. He had some really nice runs in the second half against Kentucky. One in particular, he set up a touchdown. It was like a 21-yard gain. I think he bounced it to the outside on 3rd and 1 and got Kentucky down to the goal line. And then he ended up scoring a few plays later. Got South Carolina down to the goal line. And then they've also got, as Rab says, Robbie Ashford, their backup quarterback, the former Auburn quarterback.
It just strikes me.
There's an accent. There we go.
He's playing the wrong kind of football. He should be playing left striker for Everton or something like that in the Premier League. Robbie Ashford, what a quality strike. Yes.
Well, he's a runner, and they use him in that way, kind of bring him in as a change of pace guy. And he had, I think, like 6 carries for 20-something yards against Kentucky. And so that's been what South Carolina has done. But their starter, Lenora Sellers, Brian Kelly kind of compared him to a little bit of like early Anthony Richardson in terms of his size and physicality and his ability to throw the football downfield. But how much that's going to pan out in the passing game is they haven't really shown it like an ability to beat teams through the air yet.
Why wouldn't they keep trying to run the ball against LSU? They just lost Jacoby and Guillory, right? So, and as Wilson said, they've been committed to the run. It has not been a thing of beauty for them either. I mean, you think about LSU struggle and run the ball. Like I said, they're averaging 2.78 yards per carry. LSU averages 3.93 yards per carry, which again is not great. It's 14th in the SEC. And then conversely, the LSU defense is last again in total yards. Very small sample size. It's just 2 weeks, obviously, but they're last in the SEC in total defense once again. They've created a little more havoc, perhaps. They have been a little more disruptive, especially in the USC game, I thought, but still prone to giving up the big plays. We saw them give. I think they were 8 plays of 15 yards or more by USC, and then of course the one that really stood out against Nichols was the long run by Guggenheim. When you're giving up a big play to a guy named after a museum, that's not a good look.
I mean, if Nichols can run the ball on you, why wouldn't South Carolina?
Exactly.
Yeah. And part of South Carolina's thing is they were so far up on Kentucky. I mean, you're going to run the ball more than you normally would. But the other thing, Wilson, I wanted to talk about here was Brian Kelly's comments on Whit Weeks, who's been. Do we say he's been LSU's best defensive player through 2 weeks? I mean, he's really been impressive when he's been out there. And Brian Kelly said we got to find a way to get him more than just rotational reps. And your immediate question, which I think is the right one, is what does that mean for Harold Perkins and the way LSU uses him?
Right. So Harold Perkins and Whit Weeks have both played at weak side linebacker in the base defense. And so if you got 2 guys in the same position and you're saying that one of them is going to need to be on the field more, then what does that mean for Harold Perkins? I think what we could see this week is LSU shuffle its defensive personnel around and maybe even do some things a little bit different schematically. It would not surprise me if Harold Perkins was playing the star position and Major Burns came off the field with this defense, and then you end up having Harold and Greg Penn and Whit Weeks all on the field at the same time. You'd have Harold, a guy who is much better tackler in space than Major Burns, the most athletic player I think on LSU's teams, and that could end up maybe being, and who's also been pretty good in coverage last year. That's something that's going to be required of that star position, if that is where he ends up going this weekend. Or we could see them maybe switching to like just a basic 4-3 kind of front. But is that the right thing to do when you just lose Jacoby and Guillory? You know, there's a lot of decisions that are really interesting to make here. But Whit Weeks has absolutely been the best, I think, defensive player that LSU has had through 2 weeks. He's so disruptive. He and Harold actually had the same amount of tackles. They both had 12. I think it is easy to forget. Got to give Harold some credit here. He led LSU with 8 tackles against USC. But he's only has like half a tackle for loss, I think. Whit Weeks has 1.5 tackles for loss at this point. Other than that one really disruptive play on USC's opening possession, he just hasn't like flashed like you would want a guy with his athleticism to do. And so, you know, here we are again a year later, time is a flat circle, talking about Harold Perkins' position and his usage and being whether or not he should be playing inside or outside. He's not going to be playing right on the edge like so many people wanted to take him back to where he was as a freshman. It's not. I just don't think it's going to happen. But you could see him at the star position, which I'd have him even a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, doing some things out in space and on the perimeter, covering guys in the slot sometimes, coming off the edge sometimes, and being able to blitz sometimes too. Major Burns has come in on some blitzes, and that might be the way that LSU is able to get all of its best defensive players on the field at one time. Because Whit, as Brian Kelly said this week, his words were, he can't be in a platoon situation. And then LSU has some tough decisions to make it what it wants to do at linebacker. I feel like we could see Whit Weeks start for the first time since sometime like middle of last season, I think. I think he's probably going to get a start in this game, and that Harold Perkins might slide over to the star position, and that LSU will do a little bit more to get all 3 of its linebackers on the field at one time, because that is the strength of this defense, is the linebacker position. And Blake Baker has to just figure out a way to get them all on the field at one time that makes sense and that works for this defense to bring the most out of them.
This is, I'm going to bring out a term that predates both of y'all by a lot, so forgive me. But this is the most mysterious LSU defensive personnel situation since they had a position called the drop linebacker in the late 90s when Lou Tepper was defensive coordinator under Jerry DiNardo. And people were like, and the defense was terrible. I was like, what are you doing with this drop linebacker position? Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. What are you doing? And they stuck with it. And this is Harold Perkins. Yeah, he starts out as kind of an edge player, and he's disruptive. The most disruptive defensive player LSU's had since Tyrann Mathieu, in my opinion. And Tyrann Mathieu is the most disruptive defensive player I've ever seen at LSU. Okay, so he's doing a lot as a freshman. Then they move him inside last year, and this is two defensive coordinators. You can't blame all this on Matt House. You can't just say, well, this is his decision. He's misusing him. This is now Blake Baker, and I'm like, what is the motivation here? What is the reason? And I'm only left to. And we don't know, but I'm only left to assume that Harold Perkins has said, "This is where I want to play because I want to play here in the NFL, and if not, I'm going to play somewhere else." So they're like, "Well, we better make him work here somehow than not have him at all." So, but eventually, like Wilson said, Wilson paints a very plausible and acceptable and reasonable scenario, but I gotta see it to believe it. And I hear Brian say these things, and you ever feel like he contradicts himself sometimes? Like he'll say something at one point in the season or last year, and then it's going to become something else. Like we gotta get Whit Weeks on the field. Why is it now a priority to get him on the field?
People were clamoring for him to be on the field last year more, to play over Omar Spates. Because Whit is so good at just sort of like playing at full speed every single time. And Whit would say himself last year that he was having to come up to speed on the defense and all that. And Brian Kelly said a lot last year, he tends to go with experience over youth if he thinks everything else is equal. But Whit Weeks was clearly last year one of your most exciting defensive players, and it was like, why not just let him get on the field and develop, in real time, because he was playing so well. Real quick, just for people to understand the star position, because it is kind of a new element to LSU's defense.
He has to explain it to me more than once.
Just to real quick, as we go into this game, because there's going to be a lot of focus on this, it is kind of like a hybrid defensive back / linebacker position, which you think like, well, that sounds like it might suit Harold Perkins well. Talking to Brian Kelly about this back in the spring as to why they're moving Harold inside, he said that the position that Harold played last year was basically the star position, and that they didn't want to put him in that spot this year. They wanted Major Burns playing there to have him on a position that might be better suited for what he can do. Major isn't great at making tackles and moving sideline to sideline in space, but Harold really, really is. I mean, gosh, think back to the Arkansas game, which was like the best game of his career back as a freshman, was just sideline to sideline. And his quickness and speed could really be utilized in the star position. which can really be molded around the player that you have playing it, as it's been explained to me by coaches this spring. You can do it can be more of a coverage position if you have kind of a coverage DB playing it. Georgia has done that in the past few years with Javon Bullard was playing the star. He's a much different size player than Harold or even Major Burns, but a guy who's now really playing more of like a straight safety in Green Bay. You've got Alabama has used that in sort of a similar way where it's kind of a coverage DB sort of place. But LSU could mold it around a guy who's more of a linebacker like Harold Perkins is and do some maybe different things with it. It's a really it can be a versatile spot in the defense. And LSU might be able to, again, use this as a way to get all of its best players on the field at one time.
Yeah.
Which they haven't done to this point.
The situation is certainly coming to a head, and we talked about how much is at stake this week. They got to figure this out. So that's our breakdown of the offense versus defense on each side of the ball. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with keys to the game, our sports betting segment around the SEC, and then, of course, our predictions. First, I want to let you know, Tiger fans, Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. We'll be back right after this break.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit ClassicIndustrial.com for more information.
Okay, going into our keys to the game here on the LSU Sports Insider podcast. It's Thursday, September 12th. We're 2 days away from LSU at South Carolina with Wilson Alexander, Scott Rabalais. Our keys to the game are proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. Guys, we broke it down every which way. I think we learned a lot here. What, if you could boil it down to one key that means LSU is happy flight or sad flight Saturday, what have you got?
Handling Stewart and Kennard on the edges. I think that's the real strength of South Carolina's defense. Maybe I'm overlooking other spots, but I mean, that's what they do best is they create sacks and tackles for loss. And if LSU can neutralize that, then I don't think the defense will be as effective. This is a really big test for LSU's offensive line. Because if it can continue to protect Garrett Nussmeier to the way it has to this point, then they'll be able to probably be pretty effective in the passing game. And then if they can start to, like we said, generate a run game, then I think LSU will be going home pretty happy because that's the real strength on strength of this game is LSU's offense, South Carolina's defense. And so if LSU can win up there on the line of scrimmage, then I think it's going to be going home pretty happy.
Football's a really simple game when you strip it down. LSU has to run the ball more effectively, and they have to control the run, not let their big quarterback and not let Rocket Sanders, break a bunch of big runs on them. You're going to give a big pass once in a while, but big runs on them because you can make South Carolina. If they can't run the ball too effectively, and again, they haven't run it very effectively, they just keep trying to run it. But if they're rushing for 150, 175 yards against LSU, that's not a good sign for the Tigers.
I'll give you another one. Set the tone. I mean, this is college game day. I always kind of like it when college game day is an 11 a.m. kickoff because then it immediately goes from Lee Corso's headgear pick to the game, and the crowd just seems that much more geeked up and stuff. LSU's got to take them out of it. You go down and you get a big stop. You take the lead. You're the favorite. Go play like you're the favorite. Will
they take the ball if they win the toss?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if it's that as much as even if you don't get the ball, make a big play on D, then take the ball back, go score, get out to a lead.
Yeah, no, you got to take some air of that. LSU had been there a long time. 2008, the game in 2015 was moved here. People may remember because they had flooding in South Carolina. So it's been a long time there. But it can be a tough place to play.
They'll play sandstorm. They'll do all that.
Yeah,
kind of
people
stuff.
think of it like Georgia, Florida, or Alabama, but it can be. And if they get into, if you give them a reason to believe, it can be a very loud place.
That's the flip side of it. If you're down 7-0, then all of a sudden you're going to have. Not saying you can't win, but it's going to be a long afternoon. So we'll go with that one too.
Having real quick, just like you said, to your point, having watched South Carolina play Georgia over the years, that stadium will probably be very full. Like you said, sandstorm will be blasting right at the kickoff. A bunch of people will be shaking white shakers. But if you go up 21-0, then it'll just like deflate.
Yeah, they've been in that situation enough before to where the fans just kind of, okay, this is who we are. So, we'll see what happens, but I think that's a big deal too. We're gonna do our sports betting segment with Thomas Casale. The Queen of Baton Rouge proudly sponsors the LSU Sports Insiders sports betting segment. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. Thomas gave us his LSU. Gave us LSU -7 as his pick on Monday's show. He's actually going around the SEC, which we're about to do next, for another pick. So let's hear from Thomas here.
Thanks, guys. Well, we already went over the LSU South Carolina game. I like LSU laying 7 on the road. But for my SEC game of the week, I'm going to go to an LSU rival, the Alabama Crimson Tide. You know, Alabama's on the road, and it might be tempting to take that big underdog like last week when Texas went to Michigan and Tennessee went to NC State. But I see Alabama really rolling Wisconsin here in Madison. If you look at Wisconsin, they've played 2 cupcakes, and they're struggling offensively. They're averaging just over 27 points a game, only 204 passing yards per game with Tyler Van Dyke. I think it's going to be hard to just line up and run the ball against this Alabama defense. Plus, the Tide has a healthy offensive line for the first time all season. I think you see a convincing win by Alabama. So I would lay the 15.5 points at DraftKings Sportsbook.
All right, thank you, Thomas. And Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. With top-notch screens and live betting, it's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. All right, so Thomas picked Alabama to cover against Wisconsin. He also picked LSU to cover against South Carolina. As we go around the SEC, what are you guys watching? Today's Around the SEC segment is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. And of course, we know in the SEC, it just means more. So LSU plays at 11, noon Eastern. They got the rest of the day, guys, after you're done with your stories, to go watch some games. So what are you watching?
The game that starts at the same time is interesting. Alabama, Wisconsin, similar situation for Alabama. I think going to Wisconsin, a place, obviously an unusual place to go. Camp Randall Stadium can be loud and obnoxious and a difficult place to play. They're 2-0 as well. Alabama ended up blowing out South Florida last week, but it was a close game. It was a one-score game well into the fourth quarter. So I think the fact that they're going on the road, I'm still not totally bought in the whole Kalen DeBoer thing. And I certainly think they're going to lose a game or two this year. And this could be one of those weeks. And I'm also interested to see, but a later game, Tulane at Oklahoma. Tulane obviously gave Kansas State a really tough game. Maybe got shafted, genuinely shafted by a call in that game.
It's a tough one.
And then Oklahoma struggled at home in their game. They only scored like 16 points. Right?
Against Houston, yeah.
Against Houston. So. I'm not sure if I'm not sure what to think of Oklahoma yet either, but Tulane is in a spot where they should go and play fast and loose, and maybe they can jump on Oklahoma and make them have some doubts. So that'll be an interesting one.
Well, you stole mine. Yeah, I was going to say Tulane, Oklahoma. I thought I was going to be able to outmaneuver you.
I could have sucked up to the host and said Boston College and Missouri, since Zach is a Missouri grad. The only ranked matchup on Saturday, so I'll throw that one out there too.
Yeah, I think I'll have my on Tulane, Oklahoma a little bit. Local team and Oklahoma being on LSU's schedule later in the year. That Oklahoma offense was atrocious against Houston. I mean, really, really awful. And Tulane, like you said, almost beat Kansas State. And can they go on and knock off the Sooners. That would be pretty awesome. But that game, the Missouri Boston College game has become much more intriguing with Boston College playing well. And so now this is sort of a nice test here for Missouri to see if they can actually be a college football playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, Missouri's played Murray State and Buffalo, so this is clearly a big step up for them. They've looked great doing it, but I mean and same thing with Ole Miss. I think they go to Wake Forest, so that's a road game. I mean, I think Wake Forest not expected to be that good in the ACC, but Ole Miss certainly better than anybody they've played so far. So a couple of teams we expect to be CFP contenders. Can they keep it up? In the step up in class. So Classic Industrial Services is proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States with high quality scaffolding, erection, and rental services, metal siding and roofing, steam and electric tracing systems, and much more. From large capital projects to commercial projects or your smaller quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. They're not just about business, they're a proud community partner supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. All right, guys, we have broken down the game. We have given our keys to the game. We have gone around the SEC. It is now time to pick the game. LSU at South Carolina, 11 a.m. Central Time Saturday. It's a noon kickoff local there in Columbia. The second best Columbia in the SEC, I might add. I had to throw that in there. Yeah.
Of course.
Let's pick this game. Wilson, we're going to start with you. LSU's a 7-point favorite. Where are you going?
I've got LSU to win, but not to cover. I think I said LSU 31-27. I think that this is it might even end up being a lower scoring game than that. I think I may be overestimating. I feel like the weather's going to play a factor in this one. And so I might even adjust that down to like 28-24 or something like that, because I feel like this one's going to end up being a little bit of a slog. But I still think that LSU's... I'm still sort of holding out hope for another week that LSU's offensive line turns into what we think it could be in the run game in particular. I think it's going to be able to neutralize the pass rush that South Carolina has had so far. That is still a strength of this offensive line. And so I think that LSU is going to be able to win what ends up being a fairly close game and kind of maybe a bit of a sloppy game here and there if that weather turns into what it looks like. LSU's been preparing for that this whole week, that potential for thunderstorms on Saturday. So that's what I've got.
The first week, I picked LSU to beat USC, but I got the under right. And last week, I picked 41-16, pretty close to 44-21.
Not bad.
So listen to what I've got to say, people. No, I'm kidding. Don't listen to me. But
opening up my DraftKings app. Hold on.
I'm sticking with the score I had in my preseason predictions column, which was LSU 34-23. So that means that LSU would cover, and they'd go over. The over/under is very low in this game, 48.5.
Yeah, I wonder if that's weather related.
It's got to be a factor. And Wilson certainly could be right. If there's some weather, it could bog down both teams. Look. South Carolina has a great pass rush. They have good pieces of running it. They just don't run the ball very well. When you look at it, when you break it down position by position, I think LSU has the advantage in most of the areas. Maybe not except for intangibles and defensive line. But I think they've got the advantage in most areas, including quarterbacks, including receivers, including linebackers with the good play people. So I think it's a game where it's certainly close for a while. South Carolina's going to come out with a lot of momentum and fire and adrenaline. But if LSU can make that big play, maybe like in Missouri last year, Harold Perkins drops back into coverage and makes a big interception. Something like that. They're going to need something like that. But if they get that, I think they end up pulling away a little bit in the fourth quarter to win and cover.
Here's the thing, though I don't know that we've mentioned necessarily too much, but South Carolina wants to run the ball. But I'm not worried about LSU in its first game without Jacoby and Guillory against this rushing attack because it's been rather anemic. Like the South Carolina offensive line is not good at all. They've given up a ton of sacks. They've given up a bunch of tackles for loss. They ranked like 132nd in the country in tackles for loss allowed through 2 games. So I think this is a good chance for LSU's edge rushers to go out there and actually make some big plays. Like I want to see Harold Perkins come off the edge, sure, but I think this is like a Savion Jones kind of game. We saw him have a really nice day against USC
him so far this year for sure.
2 sacks against USC. I think we could see something like that again here in this one.
Yeah, I got to admit I was a little surprised to see College Game Day coming to this game. I think if you had completely missed week 1 and didn't look at any box scores or anything, and we're just looking at how LSU and South Carolina played last week, you'd think, man, LSU's on upset alert. South Carolina's just as good as they are, if not better. I mean, I think back to week 1, and the Gamecocks needed like a late takeaway to stave off Old Dominion. Last week they had a game where everything went right away. They seem like a very good team with a lead, but I just think, for LSU, last week is a little bit of a throwaway. It was a short week. It was clearly a step down in class. I mean, it was a classic letdown spot. I think they get back up for this thing. I picked 28-21 LSU. I'd actually amend that and say more like maybe even 28-17 if the weather is something. LSU's going to find a way to win this game. And we're giving them the kiss of death with 3 LSU predictions here, but it just doesn't feel like a team that is ready to kind of give up the 2024 season, which is, as we talked about, is kind of what they'd be doing if they can't win this game.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, this is must-win territory right now. As we talked to some players this week, and they're talking about, got to go 1-0 every week. I mean, you hear that from players all the time anyway. But they're kind of have to be in playoff mode like already. They can't afford to lose this game. If we were sitting back here next week going to UCLA and they've lost, then oh man, the temperature in Baton Rouge is going to be The tenor around the whole program will just be kind of a miserable for a while, in a bit of a drag. Because instead of talking about maybe a 9-3 season, which is what I predicted coming into the year, if they lose this game, then we're talking about more like 7-5. And so they don't. That's not a position you want to be in.
Yeah, and then next week we're sitting here talking about the direction of the program. Because it's going to become a much more broad thing instead of just looking at week to week. It's going to be like, where are they going under Brian Kelly? You think about it in those terms, and it seems kind of crazy, but if you think about it in those terms, it's a very big game for him, in LSU, and one of the biggest of his tenure.
But we don't mean to be negative. We all don't see that happening. We all picked LSU to win, so we'll see if they can get it done in Columbia. Check us out. Monday we'll be back with another LSU Sports Insider podcast, and we will break down everything that happens, good or bad. Until then, Amelia Cotton is our producer. Our thanks to her. Our thanks to Waste Pro, our title sponsor. He's Wilson Alexander. Scott Rabalais. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you next time. Enjoy the game.